So as we get closer to Q4, there's going to be a lot of talk around drop shipping. What is drop shipping? So drop shipping is essentially delivering one item to a customer, as opposed to doing a bulk item to a store that then gets delivered to a client. And there's a couple of different ways that online retailers or e-commerce can sell through the drop shipping model. They can either own their own inventory and work through 3PL warehouses or their own warehouses, or what we see much more frequently, and particularly in the big and bulky space, is for these retailers to rely on the vendors for the inventory. And so they have to work very closely with the vendors to understand what's available, what they can list online, and then sell and ship to the customer. Sounds easy. But how do you now get that single item that could be in California to your customer based in Manhattan? And especially in the big and bulky space, not all carriers can service all across the US, and they definitely can't provide all the different service levels. So it's very challenging to find out who is the right carrier, what's going to be the right cost, because the cost of shipping is rolled into the price that they sell the item online. That's what free shipping is. It's the price of the item, and then it also includes the cost of the shipping as well. So we often find with clients that they have to work with a couple of different vendors to make sure that first they can have full coverage across the US, and then also the different service levels. Is it going to be dropped at the road? Is it going to go to the house? Is it going to be more of that gray glove where we bring it right up to the customer's home? Or in certain types of products, especially furniture, clients are wanting it placed in their room, and there might be a little bit of assembly. So that's sort of high level what drop shipping for e-commerce is.
So, Jillian, I know that if you're a company that's drop shipping, to get going, it's very easy, right? Because you get the order and you have your vendor, the vendor of that product that you sold, schedule the shipment to go right to the customer. What are the downsides of working with a ton of different vendors that are going to be shipping right to a customer versus moving to that next step of getting a warehouse where you can consolidate inventory in a single spot and then send out?
So if you're drop shipping and you're relying on a vendor to do your freight for you, that might be convenient. Maybe you don't have a very big logistics team, and you want to keep your operations folks looking after the customers who are actually booking the shipment. So you're relying on your vendor to do the freight and do the delivery. But you're sort of giving away some of your control, and the whole part of shipping and logistics is there isn't a magic silver bullet. You can't just make one change and suddenly you're going to be profitable. So when it comes to logistics, if you're going to give away the control of doing freight and shipping, that can directly impact your bottom line. You do need to understand how much you actually paying for the shipping, and could you take that in-house? Whether your own team internally can do that, or you can rely on 3PL type companies who manage your shipping for you, so that you can really understand what the shipping cost is. If you're working with multiple vendors across the US and in the furniture space, they're really located in sort of four areas: California, New Jersey, Houston, and of course, North Carolina. So if you can consolidate some of those shipping, perhaps you can move into a middle mile, final mile way of delivering, but that's quite sophisticated. For most e-commerce retailers, they list the product from the vendor online, and then they rely on the vendor, or they work with a 3PL partner who has access to multiple carriers to help them with that shipping.
When it comes to inbound freight, that tends to be one of the most overlooked areas within the industry. And I say this because companies don't often track what costs are incurred in having their vendors route the freight. Usually there's a 10 to 15, 20% even markup on the cost of shipping. And so those vendors are then charging them not only for the inventory that they're purchasing, but they're also making a little bit of a profit on the shipment itself by shipping it to the customer. So by taking control of that and being able to bake out what those charges look like, we often find a lot of cost savings inside of just the inbound freight. And how that works for our customers, especially ones that have 2,000-3,000 vendors in place, we create a vendor routed memo for them, or routing instructions, if you will, similar to what a Walmart or one of these big box stores would do for their clients and their vendors. but we have them distribute that to their vendors that bake out what exactly they need to do to process the shipment and give that control back to the customer. So when it comes to our customers, and if there is a plan of action to take on that vendor routed freight and bring it in-house, we do look at all metrics and details of what those vendors are doing. And oftentimes we'll take like the top 20 to 30 vendors and reach out to them to build a strategic plan in identifying not only how many DAC doors they have, but what are their hours of operation, what carriers do they see the most or work the best in picking up on time at their facilities. Because you do run into scenarios where this vendor is located in a town that is 200 miles plus from the terminal, and the carrier doesn't service that location daily. So being able to build a strategic plan, not only for our customer, but also to be able to control the inbound freight in an efficient manner, it does take a little bit of legwork on our side to identify those things and understand how those vendors operate. It also doesn't help. It also helps to make contact and build a little bit of a relationship as well, because then the vendors are more apt to working with you strategically, as opposed to getting mad and upset that there has been a change and now they're having to do all these things. So it's worth the time at the end of the day when you are trying to build out a solution for an inbound routed customer.
To understand the capacity of operational change because if we're going to change carriers, and it's very similar to what Caitlin was just saying, so it's also understanding what's the right carrier mix, because you want to have the right carriers in order to get the best blended price, but you don't necessarily always want to choose the cheapest carrier, because then you could be working with 10 or 20 different carriers. So you need to make sure you've got the right mix to get the price to be the most competitive without causing too much havoc at the vendor's end of having too many carriers coming in and through their docks. So it's a matter of working from the client perspective, who's actually listing and selling the product, if they're controlling the shipping, and then also working with the vendor as well. And so, here at Rocket, because we work with the carriers, we're that go-between to make sure we're designing the right program that's going to benefit not only the client selling the product through drop shipping, but also the vendor who's then, fulfilling the order.
Yeah, when we talk about moving the idea of vendor routed freight to somebody helping you route that freight and looking for better pricing, that world opens up to maybe more carriers than they thought were possible to do it. But it also needs to be honed in quickly, because you could lose, let's say, serviceability with that vendor or the carrier. And so it kind of is like open, but then we have to build a strategy of how that should go down. So exactly. I'm going to talk here quick about the pricing tier of, like, if you are a vendor, if you're somebody that's drop shipping, and Jillian touched on it a little bit to start off with, is most of the time you're going to start with having the vendor route that freight. It's very easy. You're going to focus on getting orders, and then once you have the order details and where that product is coming from, or multiple different vendors for a single order, you're gonna have them send it out, and then hopefully they can take on that process for you. It scales the company. But when a customer is looking for the next step in saving on freight cost, they're kind of wondering where we go. And a lot of people will look at the idea of like, well, let's try, if you have the volume, let's try to go get a CSP. The problem is there's twofold. A, how many vendors do you have and where are they located in the States? And then B, how many repeat customers do you have? That's the problem. There's the outbound destination, the consignee is never consistent. You never can predict where you're going to ship your next order. You might be able to predict on a chance of like what region it'll go to, but not the exact area. And so it's extremely hard to develop a pricing program with one or two carriers or however many, when you have no idea what the origin or destination will look like on that shipment. And so the next step in that conversation is trying to create some consistency, at least on one of the two, right? And so it might be the idea, if your vendors are all domestic within the United States, it might be the idea of looking to find a warehouse location, somewhere that you can bring in product based off of your sales. You kind of have an idea of how much inventory you can bring in, but it always comes to this area, and you're bringing in product consistently. So you always know that the origin for most of your sales will be in a single spot. All of a sudden, we have consistency now on one plane. And so we can look at a carrier that will be able to deliver nationwide, but knows where it's going to pick up, and we have an idea of volume. So that's like tier one. And then with that carrier, we can look to get specific pricing. If we want to look at going further and further, and Jillian, you mentioned this, we look at multiple warehouse locations to try and service different parts. Maybe a good portion of your freight is going to the East Coast and West Coast. Very little to the Midwest or southern portions of the state. We can use those ideas on how to specifically place where your warehousing should be, also in relation to your vendors. But the more strategic your warehousing is, the closer it may be to the end consumer, and it opens up a wide variety of pricing opportunities and just opportunities in general for different services. But that is always the tough question, is if I start as a vendor routed drop shipping company that's shipping to customers, what is the pathway for me to save money on cost and to also increase the customer delivery experience? And it's one of the more difficult business models out there to get a really good freight program. And it just so happens that we deal with those types of customers a lot. And so we work through the tiers. When are you ready to go to the next tier? And what does that next tier look like?
I think the other part you brought up as well and got me thinking about is when a vendor decides they're going to start doing drop shipping themselves, they're now going to go D2C, or a brick and mortar retailer, they decide, okay, they're going to, enhance their website and sell more products online, which are now going to be single orders that need to get shipped. What often happens is, because they've been working more in the commercial B2B, dock to dock delivery, the first place they go to their carriers are those commercial dock to dock carriers. And they're going to say, okay, can you deliver this to a customer's home? And the carrier is going to say, yes, we can, but it's got to be on a pallet, and we're going to drop it at the bottom of the road. That's even if the truck can fit along the road. And we see this time and time again. And so I think that's why you need to lean on somebody like Rocket, where we have the full spectrum of carriers, everybody from highly specialized home delivery to the gray glove, where we can get it up to the customer's home. It doesn't have to be on a pallet. And then, of course, we can also drop at the road as well, or do commercial deliveries. But I think that's the biggest mistake that we see time and time again, because vendors decide they're going to sell to the customer, but the delivery experience is really poor, and poor customer reviews will have a direct impact on online e-commerce.